Imagine wearing a suit of heavy iron armor every single day of your life. At first, it feels like a miracle. It protects you from rejection, from disappointment, from betrayal. It shields the most vulnerable parts of you from a world that once felt unsafe. But eventually, something strange happens. The armor that once kept you safe begins keeping you disconnected. You can no longer feel the world through it. You can't feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You can't feel the closeness of the people who love you. You can't even remember what life felt like before you started protecting yourself from it. The human mind is extraordinary at survival. But here's the tragedy: many people never realize they are still living inside identities built for battles that ended years ago. Today, we're exploring the hidden architecture beneath the life you're living and why the armor that once saved your life may now be the very thing preventing you from fully living it. Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles, and on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become Passion Struck. There's a fascinating truth about human beings that psychologists, neuroscientists, and storytellers have all been circling for decades. Most of us do not consciously choose the person we become. We adapted into them. The human brain is extraordinarily good at adaptation, especially in environments that feel unpredictable, rejecting, or emotionally unsafe. Because your brain has one primary responsibility above almost everything else: to protect you from danger, not to make you fulfilled, not to make you authentic, not to make you deeply connected. First, it tries to make you feel safe. And during our emotionally formative years, the brain becomes incredibly efficient at identifying what protects us from pain. This is the origin of the survival identity. A child grows up in chaos, so they become controlling. Someone grows up emotionally unseen, so they become an achiever. A person experiences betrayal, so they stop depending on anyone. Someone gets praised only when they succeed, so productivity becomes identity. And at first, these adaptations are intelligent. They are solutions. The nervous system learns these behaviors reduce pain, these behaviors increase safety, and once the brain finds a strategy that works, it reinforces it continuously. Neural pathways strengthen. The behavior becomes automatic, and identity begins forming around protection. This is where the personality paradox begins, because many people confuse survival patterns with personality. What they call who I am is often just who I needed to become. And modern culture rewards these identities constantly. The workaholic gets promoted. The high achiever gets admired. The perfectionist gets results. But underneath many high-performing identities is an exhausted nervous system trying to prevent old pain from happening again. Some of the most celebrated traits in modern life are unresolved survival adaptations in disguise. And we see it most clearly in the character of Tony Stark. When we first meet him in Iron Man, Tony appears untouchable, brilliant, funny, powerful. But look closer. The humor is deflection. The ego is armor. The constant movement is avoidance. He never slows down long enough to feel what exists underneath the performance. Then something happens. He's captured, injured, forced to confront his mortality. And for the first time, the armor stops being metaphorical. It becomes literal. He builds the suit to survive. At first, the suit saves his life, but over time, it becomes the place he hides. And that is the paradox of survival identities. The strategies that rescue us in one season of life can quietly imprison us in the next. Because eventually the danger passes, but the nervous system keeps acting like the war is still happening. So people spend years, sometimes decades, still proving, still protecting, still performing, still defending against emotional threats that no longer exist. And eventually, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Do I still need this armor? Because you cannot heal a pattern you still mistake for your personality. Now, I realize that talking about Tony Stark can be a heavy place to start for many of you, because many of you probably see yourselves in that armor that Tony is wearing, because you're wearing it yourself. If you're listening to this and that armor feels familiar, I want you to know you're not navigating this in a vacuum. This entire series is about closing the gap between the person you've been performing and the person you're becoming. And if you want to go deeper into these ideas beyond the audio, I'd invite you to join me at the Ignited Life on Substack. That's where I share clear, honest essays on purpose, resilience, and what it actually means to matter when life feels uncertain. It's the written companion to this journey. You can find it at theignitedlife.net. Now, let's go deeper. The dangerous thing about survival patterns is not that we develop them. The dangerous thing is that they work, at least for a while. The achiever gets validation. The perfectionist gains control. The emotionally guarded person avoids disappointment, and the hyper-independent person avoids abandonment. And because these strategies produce results, we rarely question them. In fact, the world often rewards them. People praise the person who never slows down. They admire the one who always appears strong. They celebrate the person who sacrifices themselves for everyone else. They call the emotionally detached person disciplined. They call the workaholic driven. But there's a profound difference between functioning and healing. A person can look incredibly successful externally while internally living in a constant state of emotional defense. I know this personally because I lived it. And this is where survival stops being adaptation and starts becoming identity. Because over time, the armor fuses to the skin. We stop saying, I learned to be this way, and start saying, this is just who I am. I'm just guarded. I'm just independent. I'm just ambitious. I'm just always busy. I'm just not emotional. But sometimes what we call personality is prolonged survival mode. And nowhere do we see this more painfully than in Good Will Hunting. Will Hunting is brilliant, a mathematical genius, sharp, funny, unbelievably gifted. But his intelligence is not just intelligence, it is protection. Every joke is deflection. Every argument is distance. Every relationship becomes sabotage the moment vulnerability enters the room. Because Will believes something many wounded people secretly believe. If people get close enough to truly know me, they will eventually leave. So he ends up staying ahead of abandonment by never fully allowing connection. And this is the tragedy of emotional armor. The behaviors designed to protect us from pain often become the very reason we cannot experience love, intimacy, peace, or belonging. The avoidant person avoids being hurt, but also avoids being known. The achiever gains admiration, but loses themselves chasing validation. The perfectionist avoids criticism, but lives in constant exhaustion. The hyper-independent person avoids disappointment, but slowly becomes emotionally isolated. What once felt protective eventually becomes imprisoning. And the hardest part is this. Most people don't even realize it's happening because survival identities are seductive. They make us feel competent, needed, in control. They help us avoid the terrifying uncertainty of vulnerability. But armor has a cost. The heavier it becomes, the harder it is to feel joy, connection, stillness, love. You can survive inside armor for a very long time, but you cannot fully live there. And eventually, life begins confronting us with the limitations of the identity we built to survive it. Relationships start feeling distant. Success stops feeling fulfilling. Rest feels uncomfortable. Silence feels threatening because underneath the performance is often a nervous system that never learned how to feel safe with the armor on. And this is why healing can feel so disorienting, because for many people, the armor is no longer something they wear. It has become who they believe they are. So this begs the question, if the armor is exhausting, if it keeps us disconnected, and if it limits our peace, why is it so hard to let go of? It's because the nervous system often confuses familiar with safe, even when the familiar is painful. This is one of the most important truths about human behavior. The brain is not designed to maximize happiness. It's designed to maximize danger. And anything unfamiliar, even something healthy, can initially feel threatening to a nervous system trained by survival. This is why we sabotage the very things we say we want. Not because we are weak, not because we are broken, but because our internal wiring still associates vulnerability with danger. If love once led to abandonment, connection feels risky. If failure once led to shame, rest feels irresponsible. If unpredictability once created pain, control feels necessary. The nervous system would often rather keep you trapped in a familiar prison than risk an unfamiliar freedom. And this is why healing is so much more than an intellectual exercise. You can logically know you are safe while your body is still reacting as though the war is happening, because the body remembers what the mind is trying to forget. Take Tony Stark again. As his story progresses, the suit becomes more than technology. It becomes psychological dependency. The armor gives him certainty, control, distance from vulnerability. Without it, he feels exposed. And so many people I have met live exactly the same way emotionally. The achiever feels anxious when they stop producing. The caretaker feels guilty when they prioritize themselves. The hyper-independent person feels weak asking for help. The emotionally guarded person feels unsafe being fully seen. Not because these things are dangerous, but because somewhere in their history, openness once came with pain. And here is the paradox I want you to hear. The armor that once protected you from suffering may now be preventing you from experiencing the very things that make life meaningful. Because love requires vulnerability. Peace requires surrender. Connection requires openness. And none of these are fully possible while your nervous system is still organized around protection. This is why transformation often feels less like becoming someone new and more like grieving someone old. Because survival identities do not disappear quietly, they fight to stay alive. The perfectionist whispers, if you let go, everything will fall apart. The achiever insists, if you stop proving yourself, you'll stop mattering. The protector warns, if people see the real you, they'll leave. But those voices are often echoes from environments that no longer exist. And eventually, we reach a moment where life asks us a difficult question. Are you still protecting yourself from a world that no longer exists? Because healing begins the moment we realize the armor may have saved our life once, but we were never meant to live inside it forever. And this leads us to one of the greatest misconceptions I hear over and over again about healing. It's that the fear that letting go of your armor will make you weak. But here is something I want you to hear loud and clear. Armor and strength are not the same thing. Armor is protection. Strength is capacity. Armor says, nothing can touch me. Strength says, I can survive being touched. Armor avoids vulnerability. But strength can tolerate vulnerability without collapsing. Armor numbs, But strength feels fully without being destroyed by what it feels. And in our performance driven culture, we often confuse emotional suppression with resilience. We mistake exhaustion for discipline, emotional distance for strength, constant productivity for purpose. And this is important to understand. You can be highly functional and deeply disconnected at the same time. That is not freedom. That is survival wearing the costume of success. And we see the resolution of this struggle in Good Will Hunting. Because Will does not lack intelligence, he lacks safety. Every time someone gets emotionally close to him, he pushes them away. Not because he doesn't want love, but because connection threatens the identity he built to survive. And the breakthrough happens in the famous scene when Sean repeats, Will, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. What makes that moment so powerful is not the words themselves. It's the collapse of the armor. For perhaps the first time in his life, Will stops defending himself long enough to be emotionally seen. And underneath the intellect, the humor, the deflection is grief. You see it in the scene: pain, fear, abandonment, the very things he spent his life trying to outrun. And this is what healing often looks like in real life, too. Not becoming emotionless, not becoming fearless, but becoming safe enough to stop organizing your entire life around avoiding pain. Because eventually, the question shifts from how do I protect myself to how do I participate in life again? How do I allow love without controlling it? How do I rest without guilt? How do I succeed without attaching my worth to achievement? How do I let people know without constantly managing their perception of me? Those are the real questions of transformation, because real strength is not found in emotional armor. It's found in emotional flexibility, the ability to stay open without losing yourself, to stay grounded without becoming guarded, to feel deeply without becoming overwhelmed. That is strength. And eventually, healing asks all of us to make a choice. Will we spend the rest of our lives protecting the wounded version of ourselves? Or will we finally allow ourselves to become more than what happened to us? Because the goal is not to become invulnerable, it is to become fully alive. And this leads us to one of the most important parts of the journey. The hardest part about emotional armor is that most people don't even realize they're wearing it, because eventually protection stops feeling like protection. It just starts feeling like your personality. The armor becomes so normalized that you stop questioning it. You just call it ambition, discipline, independence, or simply being fine. But armor is not always loud. Sometimes it looks highly successful, highly admired, highly productive, while internally completely exhausting. I know because I felt it. And we have to look honestly at how this armor shows up in our daily lives. The achiever armor says, if I accomplish enough, maybe I'll finally feel worthy. So rest begins to feel uncomfortable, and self worth becomes a moving target tied entirely to performance. The hyper independent armor says, if I never need anyone, I can never be disappointed. So you carry everything alone. You struggle to ask for help, while others admire a strength that is often a profound, quiet loneliness. The perfectionist armor says, if I control everything, I can avoid criticism or rejection. So every mistake begins to feel like a threat to your identity. The caretaker armor says, my value comes from being needed. So you become emotionally available to everyone except yourself. You anticipate everyone else's needs while quietly abandoning your own. And then there's the intellectual armor. This one is especially common among thoughtful, high performing people. You analyze your emotions instead of actually feeling them. You can explain your pain beautifully. You understand the psychology. You can articulate the wound with incredible precision. But sometimes insight becomes another form of protection because understanding your pain is not the same as allowing yourself to fully feel it. And eventually, life begins revealing where the armor lives. It is in the relationship where intimacy feels uncomfortable. It's in the anxiety that appears the moment you stop producing. It's in the exhaustion of constantly managing how other people perceive you. The armor always reveals itself where openness feels unsafe. And the truth is, most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of what failure would make them feel about themselves. Most people are not afraid of vulnerability. They are afraid vulnerability will confirm the fear that they are not enough. That's why healing requires honesty, not performance, not optimization, not pretending, honesty. The willingness to sit quietly enough to ask, what part of my personality was actually built for protection? What am I still trying to earn? What do I avoid feeling at all costs? Who might I become if I no longer needed to protect myself from the past? Because awareness changes everything. The moment the armor becomes visible, you are no longer completely trapped inside it. You begin realizing this is not necessarily who you are. It may simply be who you had to become to survive. So the truth is, your armor is not proof that you're broken. It is proof that you survived. At some point in your life, your mind and body made extraordinary adaptations to help you navigate pain, rejection, uncertainty, or loss. The armor served a purpose. It protected you when you needed it. And healing does not begin by hating those parts of yourself. It begins by understanding them. Because the goal is not to shame the survival identity. It's to recognize when survival has quietly become your permanent way of living. And there is a profound difference between surviving life and participating in it. Survival says, protect yourself at all costs. But healing teaches us that love requires openness, that peace requires surrender, and that meaning is often found not in control, but in presence. Perhaps the bravest thing a human being can do is stop organizing their entire identity around what hurt them, not because the pain didn't matter, but because your life is bigger than the wound. Your future is bigger than the adaptation, and your worth was never meant to be measured by how well you learn to protect yourself. So maybe freedom begins the moment you stop asking, how do I become invulnerable? And start asking, where is it finally safe for me to be fully human? Because the armor may have saved your life once, but you were never meant to live inside it forever. And next week, we continue our Forged by Adversity series with someone whose life powerfully embodies what it means to transform unimaginable loss into possibility. I'm joined by my friend Amy Purdy. After losing both of her legs at 19, Amy rebuilt her life to become a Paralympic medalist, best-selling author, runner-up on Dancing with the Stars, and one of the most inspiring voices on resilience and human potential. But what makes her story so extraordinary is not simply what she overcame. It's how she stopped seeing adversity as the end of her identity and began using it as the foundation for an entirely new relationship with possibility.
When I first lost my legs, everybody told me what I couldn't do, that I wouldn't be able to snowboard again, that they didn't know what my life would look like either. They didn't know if I could go back to work as a massage therapist or I'd be able to wear the things I want to wear, my high heels, and people would actually say, I'm so sorry. Really, you lost your leg. Nurses would say that. I am so sorry. It was just such a sad thing. And I didn't want this kind of story to be created for me, like this identity that I'm supposed to now take on because now I have a disability and it looks a certain way. I didn't want that to define what my life was going to look like. I wanted to figure out what my life was going to look like.
If this episode helped you see yourself differently, share it with someone who may be still carrying the armor they no longer need. If you're interested in going deeper, you can pick up the workbook on my Substack at theignitedlife.net. And if you'd prefer, To watch these, then listen, please check out our YouTube channels at John R. Miles and Passion Struck Clips. Until next time, live life passion struck.